prostrate to the teacher Buddha Shakyamuni, prostrate to Manjushri wisdom, homage to kind root lineage masters. The subtle Dharma, rare in 100k eons. See, hear, uphold it, realize meaning Tathagata. In order to liberate all sentient beings, let us give rise to the unsurpassed and supreme bodhicitta. We will now continue our study of the guidance on the preliminary practices of Dzogchen as we proceed further. Previously, in the section on how to listen to the Dharma, we already discussed eliminating the 3 faults and the 6 stains. Starting today, I will explain for you the 5 ways of improper retention right now. These are divided into 5 aspects, that is to say, specifically speaking, retaining the words but not the meaning, retaining the meaning but not the words, retaining without understanding, retaining with confusion between higher and lower levels, and also retaining in a reverse manner. Altogether, there are a total of 5 distinct types. Among them, the very first in this context is actually preserving the words, but not the meaning. This was already discussed earlier on. During the process of listening to the Dharma, the proper and respectful demeanor is extremely important. If your motivation and conduct as you are listening to the Dharma teachings are not properly and carefully adjusted, and do not truly and fully accord with the principles of the Dharma itself, then the advantage or benefit you gain from listening will be very limited as a result. That is why nowadays some people frequently listen to teachings, but after listening, they do not see any obvious results. Moreover, the Dharma does not become integrated into their minds, and there are reasons for this. It should be directly connected, in particular, to the way one listens to the Dharma in terms of understanding and attention. As we mentioned earlier, to hear and receive Mahayana teachings in this very life is indeed certainly not an easy thing to accomplish or achieve. It requires accumulating merit over hundreds of thousands of eons to have the conditions we possess today. How can such precious Dharma teachings be integrated into our minds? It requires various favorable conditions, and we must make an effort to create these conditions. If we happen to lack such as these important Dharma relationships and connections in our lives, then the benefit we ultimately gain from the Dharma for ourselves in the end will be extremely limited. Therefore, it also explores and discusses here in detail the 5 ways of not upholding the Dharma. During our study, we must carefully examine ourselves to see whether or not we actually possess these faults. If we do indeed have these kinds of faults, then we must, without any delay, certainly begin to gradually eliminate them from now on. Otherwise, the Dharma you hear will simply have no effect on your mental continuum. So the first is called upholding the words, but not the meaning. Upholding means receive, maintain. What it means here is if one focuses solely on memorizing and maintaining beautiful and melodious phrases, but does not carefully analyze the profound meaning, then it is just like a child, innocently and gently picking flowers. In other words, scrutinizing the words and phrases alone does not bring any benefit to the mind. This is explained very clearly. In the course of our study and practice, there are some individuals who devote all their attention exclusively to words that are exceptionally beautiful in sound and highly melodious in tone, focusing only on the pleasing and using extremely rich language, excellent writing, and quoting many idioms, scriptural references, and couplets, as well as certain word pairings or rhymes, which are words placed together or that sound alike to create a pleasing effect or rhythm. If this particular aspect is very good, then he really enjoys listening to it, especially nowadays people with good writing skills or a certain level of education. He is not satisfied with the writing of ordinary people. When they look at an article or read a scripture or treatise, they first check whether the writing style is good and how the structure of the text is arranged. This is the first thing they observe. If they feel the writing style is not particularly elegant, they are not very willing to continue reading because they are especially fond of certain literary expressions. Actually, this isn't reasonable either. If things continue this way, one might not pay particularly close and careful attention to the truly profound and meaningful content, such as that which is expressed by the text. For us, the most crucial thing is the content, No matter how pleasant the wording is, it doesn't serve purpose. We're not here to listen to singing or to read something just because it sounds nice. But if the content being expressed doesn't connect with reality at all, then it really has very little effect on us. We're not training to become writers, nor are we specifically focusing on honing our literary skills at this time. Therefore, when listening to teachings, if you become overly attached to the wording or the literary style, this is also unreasonable, as it will cause you to overlook the profound meaning. We can see that some of the teachings from eminent masters and great practitioners of the past are ordinary in terms of language, but in reality, the content and meaning they express truly and directly reaches straight to the heart. There are, indeed, quite a lot of such scriptures and essential instructions. If we really become fixated only on the wording and fail to thoughtfully contemplate its truly profound meaning, it's like a child in the world who goes to a meadow to pick some fresh flowers. Why does he pick them? Because he has no particular purpose. He just thinks his flower looks really nice. And that flower over there looks quite pretty. And so he casually picks them. But in reality, in fact, he does not really have any clear or special purpose whatsoever. In the same way, if we use beautiful words here, or we find the scriptural references there pleasant to hear, or this poem is beautiful, and we interpret the entire content of the Buddhist scriptures in this way, never really paying attention to the actual content, this is simply unreasonable. In fact, this kind of mistake is commonly made by people in literary circles. Also, while listening and contemplating, some people love to study logic, poetics, or rhetoric, so they become easily attached to these words and expressions. In fact, if you are always attached to these words, even if you recite them every day, it may not necessarily have any effect. This includes some Buddhists nowadays who recite scriptures and treatises every day, but have no understanding of their meaning at all, nor do they uphold the meaning in any way. They only adhere strictly to the words themselves and nothing more. Of course, the scriptures themselves do have some merit. For example, if you recite Amitabha Buddha's name or the Diamond Sutra each and every day, there should indeed be merit in reciting the Diamond Sutra. But if you don't understand the meaning at all, not even a little, then according to some great masters, as they say, the merit is not very great either. In the past, Master Hanshin said in his Song of Idle Leisure, reciting sutras is easy, understanding hard. Reciting without understanding is ultimately idle. If we only focus on the words themselves and never really pay close attention to their meaning, then the merit and significance are not very great either. So we really shouldn't place too much significance or importance on the words themselves. In this context either, in our view, nowadays during the process of studying sutras and treatises, many people need to pay attention to this point. If you first see that the content of a book is truly extraordinary, then you don't necessarily need to have exceptionally refined language. When Patrul Rinpoche wrote this book, Preliminaries, he said that using skillful language is not necessarily the same as the teachings of the lineage masters. Therefore, he used simple and easy to understand words to explain the meaning of the Buddhist scriptures. In the past, some ancient Tibetan teachings and scriptures have also mentioned and discussed this particular point. Ordinary, everyday language, such as the words we use daily, is able to convey the meaning of the Buddhist scriptures. So what real use is the most beautiful writing style after all? There are such sayings as well. During our process of studying, if everyone becomes overly attached to the words and pays too much attention to the phrasing, they may abandon the profound meaning. As a result, their own mental continuum may not truly benefit. Especially nowadays, there are some people in academic circles who single-mindedly research. During the process of research, sometimes they often, especially when it comes to the profound meaning of Buddhist emptiness and great compassion, nowadays people rely entirely on words to understand, which presents certain difficulties. Therefore, in Buddhism, on one hand, the guidance of a teacher is necessary. With the guidance of a teacher, one can also comprehend the profound meaning on their own. However, when you are simply relying on words and phrases alone to communicate, does not mean that everything can be understood solely through words. So it is absolutely essential to fully grasp the proper measure of this important principle. This is the first question. The second one is to uphold the righteousness instead of the text. Holding to the meaning, not the words, is also something we should pay attention to. If one believes all textual structures are merely empty talk without any real meaning, and thus comes to look down on words and phrases, focusing only on the profound meaning, then words and meaning will ultimately become separated from each other, because without relying on words and phrases, it is fundamentally impossible to access the profound meaning. So there are some individuals who believe that all textual structures have no significant meaning or value. They think that all meaning is realized entirely through direct experience of the content. This is especially the case now in some places in Tibet, where certain practice-oriented centers do not place much emphasis on study and contemplation. For example, they do not particularly praise memorizing scriptures or engaging in daily study and reflection. Certain Zen Buddhist temples, specifically in Han areas, also believe that absolutely no written words should be established. A special transmission outside teachings, beyond words and letters, directly pointing to the mind, seeing one's true nature and becoming a Buddha. Therefore, such teachings strongly advocate that, apart from genuine Chan, Zen itself, in essence, there is nothing to be transmitted externally, nor is there any need to establish written texts. Everything is fundamentally achieved through directly pointing to the nature of the mind, and as a result, realizing Buddhahood. Many Chan masters have taught in this way. But in reality, we should not fall into bias or extremism, especially in our thinking. Why is that? Because in Chan Buddhism, authentic texts, as well as Chan koans and teachings, are actually quite numerous. Moreover, we can see that some Chan masters in history also relied on certain scriptures, such as the Lotus Sutra, the Shurangama Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra, and many other sutras to attain enlightenment and realization. There are countless such historical examples in history. Therefore, to say that all written words are, in fact, completely wrong, is also unreasonable. Here, we must always keep in mind that relying solely on meaning and not on the actual words themselves is important. This kind of statement is also incorrect. Many practitioners in Tibet, as they often do, say this: an old man of true meaning must often rely on the crutch of carefully chosen words. If the old man does not have the crutch to support himself, he is unable to walk at all. In the same way, any meaning is, in essence, expressed through words. If there are simply no words, then there is no way to express it. There are very few exceptions, such as the ancient Bumamosa or a very few great masters in Chan Buddhism who can realize the truth by a method. But in fact, actually, everyone here, is it truly and precisely the same as the renowned sixth patriarch of Chan? Well, probably not exactly. Many people want to be like the sixth patriarch themselves in their own lives, unwilling to listen, reflect, or go through years of ascetic practice. And just by reading a single scripture or hearing a single Chan saying, they expect to suddenly attain enlightenment. But this is quite difficult. We can carefully observe our own mental continuum from morning till night and see how many afflictions arise in our minds each day, how many impure thoughts occur, and how many pure thoughts we have. If we do not gradually listen, reflect, and practice now, we might mistakenly think that we have an excellent and strong spiritual foundation, but this may not actually be true. Therefore, we must rely on words and texts in order to understand and to realize the meaning of emptiness. Abandoning words altogether is also quite difficult. If we do not rely on conventional truth, we cannot attain the ultimate truth. Without attaining the ultimate truth, we cannot reach nirvana. In the fundamental verses on the middle way, Nagarjuna also explained that emptiness, the ultimate truth, is realized through conventional language. Emptiness, the ultimate truth, is realized through conventional language and concepts. Without using conventional language, then attain nirvana, or the profound meaning of emptiness. we have no way, in our listening, contemplation, and practice, especially during studying the preliminary practices, Nyingma, we must first rely on words. Only by relying on words can we understand their meaning. Such practical instructions for practice are indeed very important for everyone. I sincerely hope that during your study and thoughtful contemplation, you do not in any way overlook or neglect either important aspect. Please remember this. You might say, I think the meaning is what really matters right now. I spend all day thinking about the meaning, so these words and phrases are unnecessary. Why recite them? If you shout till hoarse, it's pointless. Don't recite. Just observe the mind. Just rest in it. Making such grand statements, I do not praise this. It's unreasonable. Because if you can't even memorize the words, if you can't even understand the words, it's virtually impossible for you to truly and completely grasp their meaning. There are also some people who think that the words themselves are, in particular, very important. But as for the meaning, for the time being, they don't pay much attention to it. Person writes well, person's writing is great. This person is truly very eloquent and articulate. Just hearing the sound of his voice alone, they never actually really contemplate the real content. This is also not reasonable at all. I've heard that nowadays, in some university exams, the content is very empty. But it doesn't matter as long as the writing style is good. As long as the wording is especially polished, you immediately get a perfect score. In fact, this too is a flaw in the education system. As Buddhists, we must focus on both aspects, the words and the meaning at the same time. This relates to careful listening, thoughtful contemplation, and practice, because in the process of listening and thinking, you have to pay attention to the text. When you practice, you have no choice but to pay attention to its meaning. If your listening, contemplation, and practice are all very well integrated, then you will genuinely value both the words and the content, appreciating them fully. Therefore, the precious Guru truly and very sincerely emphasized in the process of spreading the Dharma that the fourfold assembly of disciples should pay attention to both the words and the meaning at the same time. This can also be seen in the teachings of Patrul Rinpoche. I hope that in the process of listening and contemplating, my Dharma friends, meaning matters, but some ignore text. Even when teaching, they don't look at the words, always keeping their eyes closed. Even if you are smart, you might not memorize the text without looking at it. So I really can't approve of people who don't look at the text. No matter what your status is, some people only think the words are important and don't care about their meaning. This person's unacceptable. If you only rely on words, it doesn't serve much purpose either. What we need most is the content, the meaning. Only its meaning can eliminate the afflictions in our own mental continuum and lead to enlightenment. So these two aspects are extremely important and must be taken seriously without exception. Then, the third point is about upholding without understanding. If you don't know if it's definitive or provisional, or hidden motives in the teachings, yet you still uphold them, it will lead to misunderstanding the important words and their meaning, resulting in going against the true Dharma. This also mentions here that if you haven't understood its content, in the end, the entire meaning and the words themselves will, as a result, be at odds. This may even give rise to wrong views in your own mind stream, leading to many unreasonable ideas. Why do we say this? Because only when we truly value and appreciate both the words themselves and the deeper meaning behind them can we truly comprehend the content of the sutras, treatises, or the teachings of the masters. If you haven't understood the content being discussed, you definitely won't be able to properly and accurately grasp its true meaning. Because we are well aware, it is important to recognize that within the Buddhist scriptures, there are many different meanings, and these can often be interpreted in a variety of ways. This reflects the richness and diversity found throughout Buddhist teachings, especially since the Buddha, in accordance with the varying capacities of sentient beings, taught different Dharma methods. Some teachings are definitive in nature, while others are provisional in their intent. Regarding definitive and provisional teachings, everyone should have heard this many times before, so I will not elaborate here. But in general, what we call definitive refers to that which accords with ultimate truth. For example, the teachings on emptiness, given in the second turning of the Dharma wheel, these are truly definitive teachings. No theory can reasonably or effectively refute them. In the third turning of the Dharma wheel, the Buddha spoke of the innate luminosity of Buddha nature, the intrinsic clarity. This too can be considered a definitive teaching. Neither of these can be refuted by any valid reason. However, in front of other sentient beings, the Buddha taught differently to meet the needs of different beings. Sometimes he said, I exist, and at other times he said, I do not exist. But in truth, non-existence is the real definitive teaching. The teaching of existence was given temporarily, according to the needs of certain sentient beings. Therefore, when it comes to understanding Buddhism, we must study it in a comprehensive, complete, and systematic way. If you don't study like this, and instead take a single passage out of context as the ultimate meaning, then I'm afraid the true doctrine may not be fully, completely, or thoroughly understood or comprehended by everyone. Especially the distinction between definitive and non-definitive teachings is indeed very important in Buddhism. Some Dharma teachers say that whatever aligns with their own minds is definitive, and whatever differs from their minds is non-definitive. Views exist. If that were the case, then, for example, ordinary people, when they form a strong attachment to worldly possessions or people such as family or material things, that would also be considered definitive, simply because you like the object of your attachment, at least in your view. Some interpretations do not explain it in this particular way. Personally, I believe that it should in fact be in accordance with the actual reality, definitive and non-definitive. I will not analyze them in detail here. In short, we need to study and contemplate extensively. Only then will you understand definitive and non-definitive teachings, secret and intended meanings. You will then know, for example, when the Buddha says in a certain sutra what the merit is of reciting a particular Buddha's name, or in another sutra, the merit of reciting a certain mantra. All of these items have been carefully analyzed to ensure that each one was thoroughly reviewed and nothing was missed. There are 4 types of secrets, 4 types of intended meanings. For example, as mentioned previously, earlier in the 8th chapter of the book titled Resting the Mind's Nature, these particular points and topics have already been thoroughly discussed and explained. The secret of secrecy, the secret of meaning, the intended meaning, and so on. When you analyze these one by one, you will realize the Buddhist scriptures make many distinctions. It is not as we imagine that just because the Buddha said something, we should treat it as the most definitive teaching. That is not the case. Of course, this principle, only after long-term study and contemplation can one distinguish these clearly. After studying the Sword of Wisdom, many people should also, in general, have some understanding in this regard. Therefore, having a truly comprehensive understanding of Buddhism is very important. Today, lay practitioners and teachers, he just understands the meaning of words better in a way that others might not. But as for whether its meaning is definitive or not, sometimes they are unable to fully comprehend this aspect. Whether teaching the Dharma or understanding it in daily life, you might interpret the meaning of the scriptures merely based on the words themselves. In the past, the great masters often said, leaving one word of the sutras is demon speech. Reading words only wrongs the Buddhas of the 3 times. There are such sayings as well. If one truly and completely departs from the meaning of the Mahayana scriptures, then this, from a certain perspective, this is also considered to be under the influence of demons. It goes against the meaning of Buddhism. Deriving meaning only from the words is unreasonable. But nowadays, sometimes, without long-term study and contemplation, seemingly you may appear to be teaching the scriptures. But in reality, if you haven't understood the true meaning of the scriptures, this is still a significant fault. Therefore, the distinction between definitive and non-definitive meanings must be analyzed. Otherwise, as I have previously indeed quoted from the chapter on conditions, it says, one kills one's parents, purifies the 2 kings, destroys all one's retinue and possessions, and thus attains purity. There is such a verse as this one. On the surface, it seems to mean one should kill one's parents. The king, ministers, and retinue, all of these should be destroyed as well. Only after destroying all of these can a person attain liberation. But in reality, that's not what it means. Here, the parents, king, and so on are all symbolic. Attachment, grasping, self-view, rules, and rituals view. All these wrong views must be destroyed. The storehouse consciousness, the alaya vijnana, only after these are destroyed. Can a person truly attain liberation in this lifetime?
Nowadays, since we sometimes lack long-term study and contemplation, it can be quite difficult to directly interpret the content of the Buddhist scriptures. Therefore, I sincerely hope that everyone will still study systematically, especially in Longshen Pa's Rest of Mind Nature, Chapter 8. Some classifications of definitive and provisional teachings. After this, we will know for sure what kind of truly profound teachings the Buddha gave in front of which sentient beings. You will fully understand this yourself if you grasp this principle. In any situation, you will not have difficulty explaining the teachings of the Buddhist scriptures. Therefore, it is stated here, if we do not understand the principle of definitive and non-definitive teachings, and instead, perhaps, casually explain or interpret them on our own, it can lead to misunderstandings and misinterpretations, for example. So in daily life, we must always be mindful this takes much study. If you do not possess enough wisdom, you may not necessarily understand the ultimate profound meaning of the Buddhist scriptures. This is holding on without understanding. In other words, you have not grasped the meaning. You do not have the authority to simply proclaim or casually declare the truths of the Dharma. This is the third issue. The fourth is holding on with confusion between higher and lower teachings. If you uphold the teachings with such confusion, you are clearly violating the principles of the Dharma. If you are listening to teaching or practicing the Dharma, you will find yourself in a situation full of contradictions. If we have already found ourselves to be confused in our understanding about the proper sequence of higher and lower teachings, as we know originally, the Buddha's teachings are fundamentally structured in layers for those with superior, intermediate, and inferior abilities. It's just like elementary school, middle school, and university, for example, in the secular world. The curriculum progresses carefully, step by step. It's not as if when you're in first grade, you must study third-year university courses. That's not how it works. Even in ordinary educational theory, there is a clear step-by-step progression such as this. Only after you have completed the previous level of study are you actually qualified to enter the next higher stage at this point in time. The same principle applies to the Buddha's teachings. It is exactly the same in every respect. If you study exoteric school, esoteric school, Tibetan Buddhism, or Chinese Buddhism, there should be a sequence. However, there are some individuals, because they were not particularly well versed in Buddhist doctrine before, as a result, they do not really understand that the content within Buddhism is structured in levels. They simply think that all of Buddhism is just one single teaching. They believe that if they try the deepest teachings first, then those must be the most supreme. This is especially true nowadays, as many people study Vajrayana Buddhism. They all feel that the preliminary practices are a bit tedious. To listen, contemplate, and practice this way can take long. 500,000 accumulation stuff. They skip this step and go straight, without delay, to listening to the most sublime teachings of the unsurpassed great perfection. They are unwilling to systematically study and practice step by step. Instead, they seek out empowerments from a master through various connections, hoping to receive the highest blessings and to attain enlightenment immediately. But this is actually quite challenging and difficult to achieve. It's almost like trying to build a stable structure on slippery, unpredictable ice, because if you haven't laid a solid foundation, it's actually very hard for the higher states to manifest. In the past, the renowned great master Aryadeva also once famously said in the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, the Buddha said these skillful means are like ladder rungs ascending step by step. The teachings and methods taught by the Buddha are like steps on a staircase, each one guiding us forward for spiritual progress and understanding. You progress layer by layer in an orderly and gradual manner. It's not as if you suddenly leap all the way up to the very top of a tall building. It's simply not like that at all. Therefore, we must understand this sequence clearly. First, preliminary, then main, then concluding practices. However, there are a very few exceptions. Among the lay practitioners I know, some are truly excellent. They listen, contemplate, and practice. Then they go further to receive teachings from Vajrayana Buddhism. But some people are not like this. While we engage in long-term study and practice, they can't stand it and see themselves as superior. When they talk to others, they use certain phrases, Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch or Shrangama Sutra, as well as a few particularly advanced terms from Vajrayana Buddhism. Phrases like all is non-dual and indistinguishable, emptiness and luminosity, the clarity of intrinsic nature, and so on. Using these terms makes them feel comfortable because they need not do austerities or prostrations. When they talk, they also often say things like, for example, have you by any chance received the four empowerments? I need to receive the lineage of this school, and I need to receive the lineage of that school as well. I want to practice Tammo meditation and immediately attain enlightenment. Every time they speak from a seemingly high level of realization, it may feel comfortable to them, but their actual foundation might be quite ordinary. Some people really just regard themselves as having a very high spiritual capacity. But in reality, some of the basic Buddhist teachings actually, for example, the fundamental principles about the rarity of human life, have never even crossed their minds at all. The inconceivable blessings of taking refuge in the three jewels and the unique faith that arises from it. It is quite possible that these feelings perhaps have simply never been generated in them at all. In this case, can these states of realization really arise out of nowhere? For such realizations to arise one after another in your mental continuum, I think it would be difficult. So nowadays, if many people actually get the sequence wrong, for example, their entire lifetime of practice can be said to be in disarray, it is impossible for it to be truly successful. You might think you are right, but in reality, it is unreasonable. It's just like education in the secular world. It really is like this. If you are extremely gifted, you could skip elementary and middle school and go straight to studying university textbooks, but such a person would have to be exceptional. If you are not exceptional, just an ordinary person, I don't want to go to primary school, I don't want to go to middle school, but you still want to have university level courses taught to you every single day, what would the other students honestly think about that? Do you think, indeed, in this degenerate age, there are actually a very few teachers who also emphasize you can just abide directly, just directly observe the innate purity. Of course, observing in this way is also acceptable. There is no single authority in Buddhism. If your teacher has already given you permission to do so, then we can't force you, nor can we impose our own views on you, of course. If you lack foundation and you only abide and observe your own mind, that's something any of us can do. But without the foundational groundwork, you may not necessarily achieve the result. Therefore, I sincerely hope that you will still proceed step by step. Especially now, we are emphasizing the practice of the preliminary practices. This time, for every except for a very few indeed, with exceptional faculties, I hope you try these practices. After some time, the Dharma teachers here, I hope you will observe if there is anyone who does not need to do the preliminary practices. If there is, it would be best for you to come to me first, and I will then give you a test. I will simp regardless of whether it's about... but I do have some understanding of both Vajrayana and Chan Buddhism. If someone truly does not need to practice the preliminaries, then I will sign off on it. I will state that this person really does not need to do the preliminary practices, and I would even listen to teachings from them. If they genuinely have the key instructions, we have no jealousy at all. Everyone should let them give us an empowerment. Let them bless us. Let them share the realizations and insights in their own continuum with us. That would be perfectly fine, truly. Aside from this, if you think of yourself as being arrogant and feel like, I probably don't need to do the preliminaries. I've heard that among us, there are few individuals like this. I probably don't need to do the preliminaries. I don't need to practice. I don't need to study or contemplate. If you think you don't need to study or contemplate, I have a few ways to test you right now. I have several methods for testing, but it really depends on whether they actually dare to come, though they probably will, because they've already reached such a high level. For them, it's really nothing at all. It's nothing to them. Having strong attachment is not good. Honestly, truly, I sincerely really hope that this time as well, with so many people here, all diligently practicing the common preliminaries, many government officials I personally know, including some of my classmates, they also feel that they should definitely take advantage of this opportunity. With many monastics and many lay practitioners, and many people worldwide practicing, the merit is tremendous. Many people are participating voluntarily, Everyone wants to practice together. So some people take their own Buddhist fate out of arrogance. I have to say, I think that's really quite unfortunate. Therefore, during this practice of the preliminaries, I hope everyone won't mix up the order or hold mistakes, because that clearly and obviously goes against the true principles of Buddhism. If that happens, whether you're listening to teachings, giving teachings, or practicing, if your sequence is not correct, if your order is wrong, then it definitely just won't work. For example, the previous edition, you haven't understood the rarity of human life or the impermanence of life. If ideas never arose in mind stream, if you never reflect on how rare human life is and feel happy as you are for someone like this in their mind stream, is it possible for very high realizations to arise? I'm afraid not. When we look at the great masters and accomplished practitioners of the past who attained high realizations, they all studied in a very systematic way. No matter which teacher or which Dharma teaching it was, wherever it was available, they were willing to go there to receive it. Moreover, they were willing to practice austerities and do the preliminary practices. As their realization grew higher, they would never look down on the more basic teachings at all. They considered contemplation on karma, the rarity of human life, and so on to be extremely important. They never showed contempt for prostrations or the like. If there is nothing realized or in your mind, yet you think highly of yourself, that is a kind of arrogance. It's hollow and meaningless. Deceiving yourself and others, better not to study Buddhism at all. Because if you don't study Buddhism, you might not even develop such wrong views. Therefore, during the process of listening and contemplating, I hope everyone can gently strive to avoid this kind of arrogance. You should follow the proper sequence carefully and step by step. Next, the fifth point is upholding in a mistaken way. So if one upholds and practices with a mistaken understanding, then one's own mental continuum will be damaged by wrong discriminative thoughts spreading. It may even, in some unfortunate cases, lead one to become a disgrace to Buddhism. Here, it says that some people in this document, the fundamental teachings of Buddhism are originally very precise and uncompromisingly pure, but a very small number of individuals, lacking the wisdom and capacity for listening and contemplation, have already misunderstood the true meaning of the Dharma. For example, we usually both Chan Buddhism and the Madhyamaka school talk about emptiness. Some people mistakenly believe that emptiness means nothing exists at all. They then start to slander the law of cause and effect and disparage making prayers to the three jewels. They say everything is empty and nothing exists. In reality, as a matter of fact, this is a mistaken view. True emptiness does not mean that absolutely nothing exists at all. That's not the intended meaning. As a result, wrong views spread in their own mental continuum, and in the end, they stop practicing any virtuous deeds. There are indeed people like this, some people, because he has a somewhat basic understanding of the Madhyamika and also of the emptiness method, they think that nothing really exists anymore. They find negative and positive actions fine. His Holiness once told a very remarkable story about this. There was an old man who had heard some about the teachings on emptiness. Then he thought nothing existed at all. Later, he started killing goats. And while killing them, he would tell them, "What is killed it doesn't exist. The one doing the killing me also truly does not exist. Today, as I kill you, I recite the Avalokiteshvara mantra at the same time." What he did was very contradictory. Perhaps he was also afraid in his heart. He wondered if, after he died, he himself would suffer. So he would recite the Avalokiteshvara mantra while killing. The spread of such wrong views is especially frightening. Nowadays, there really are people who, when it comes to Buddhist teachings, whether it's about luminosity or about emptiness or human life's rarity, because their own wisdom is insufficient, they often misunderstand these teachings. So all of you Dharma teachers and counselors present here must pay close attention. How did teachers before explain this? In the process of explaining, are you perhaps already in some way making mistakes? You need to remind yourself about this from time to time. Otherwise, sometimes you might make mistakes in your explanations without even realizing it. On the surface, you may be able to explain the words, but if you haven't truly understood the meaning, then it may also have no real significance. A fool recites thousands, yet understands not one sentence. In the Udana Varga, it says, a fool recites 1,000 verses, but does not grasp a single sentence. A wise person understands one sentence, and thus comprehends 100 meanings. Although a fool may, on the surface, and only superficially be able to recite, or perhaps even repeat, 1,000 verses from memory, none of the content actually ever truly integrates into his own mind stream. He cannot fully grasp the true meaning at all, whereas a wise person is not like this. Even if he only recites or understands the meaning of a single sentence, but through this one sentence, he can fully comprehend 100 different meanings. For example, a wise person, just from the content of a single verse in a proverb, such as the principle that all phenomena are impermanent, or that all conditioned things are suffering, he's able to fully and completely grasp the entirety of all of life's content. The difference between a wise person and a fool is not in how eloquently they speak, nor is it necessarily in the great contributions they make to society externally. Some teachings can profoundly impact the transformation of a person's entire life, and play a very significant and truly important role in subduing inner afflictions. The difference between wise and fool is substantial. Therefore, in the process of listening and thinking, I hope you will not be confused and mistakenly holding on to things is common. Dharma friends, listening, contemplating, think that they have already understood the meaning of the scriptures, but in fact, you may have misunderstood the meaning of the scriptures in another context. This phenomenon is common, therefore, Dharma teachers, whether during regular or oral exams, must carefully observe whether someone has truly misunderstood or actually understood. This issue must be analyzed. Otherwise, especially nowadays, people in the world from a young age are heavily influenced by worldly cultural habits. They take certain worldly principles or reasoning and see them as Buddhist texts. This still happens. This is also very common even among some Dharma teachers. Some teachers believe that what they are teaching is the content of the Buddhist scriptures, but what they say is not close to the actual teachings of the scriptures this situation exists. Some people think they have understood and that their explanations are excellent, but in reality they are not even close or anywhere near the mark. Such cases are quite common. Therefore, we must absolutely eliminate the above faults. This is very important, the above-mentioned faults, as previously discussed. If you focus only on words, not meaning, that won't work either. Focus on meaning, not words, won't work. If the order is mixed up, that's not acceptable. If the sequence is confused, that's not acceptable either. If you don't understand or misunderstand the meaning, these points are extremely crucial. Whenever you take the time to study any sutra or treatise, you must first simply adjust your mindset. Only by following this principle can you truly understand its content. So, before we start studying these preliminary practices, if each person follows the teachings of Patrul Rinpoche, you are teaching the Dharma to others or studying together with everyone, you must uphold these requirements. This doesn't mean you can just mention it verbally and be done with it. Not about reviewing it, done, not like that. You need to do this over the long term. In fact, the entire content must be studied within this kind of framework in order to be fully understood. You should uphold it through a correct approach that is flawless in both words and meaning. There should be no contradiction between the words and their meaning. The context should be coherent and the meaning should be accurately understood. This is the way to uphold the Buddhist scriptures. When you encounter passages difficult to understand or content extensive, you must never think that it's impossible to grasp and simply give up. You need to uphold it with perseverance and effort. When we encounter certain scriptures or verses, like the ornament of clear realization or the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, the content is rich and the language is not easy to understand. For the later chapters of the 400 verses on the middle way, many Dharma friends just can't keep up. Some time ago, many people in our Bodhi Study Association, when studying the chapter on wisdom, for example, many of them, ended up giving up. It was really quite pitiful. Because from the first to the 9th chapter, things went quite smoothly. But when they reached the chapter on wisdom, they just couldn't get through it and had already fallen. That's really just a pity. But when you reach this point, you shouldn't think, there's nothing I can do now. I can't understand it, so I'll just give up. You shouldn't do that. You should approach it with perseverance, with patience, or with a joyful and open heart, and keep studying it again and again. If it's a principle of the world, you wouldn't just give up immediately over a small setback or obstacle. That's simply not how it works at all. Sometimes, when it comes to certain terms or meanings, if you don't understand them this time, then try again next time. In our institute, there are some Khenpos. They may face a doctrinal teaching this year, and if they don't understand the doctrine this year, then next year or the year after, they keep going over scriptures and treatises for years and gradually come to understand their meaning. We should do the same. When you listen to the wisdom chapter for the first time, it's definitely not easy to understand. I've mentioned before that when I first started, listening once or twice was still quite difficult. But later on, there were basically no major problems for the most part. So many people, when they encounter a somewhat difficult concept, they think this is too hard. Forget it. I don't need to look at it anymore. There's nothing I can do. Then it also says here, if you come across teachings with simple meanings and few words, some treatises are clear and brief, like the 37 practices of a bodhisattva or the preliminary practices, whose content is relatively easy to understand, but you also shouldn't look down on or belittle the Dharma just because its meaning seems simple. You must not forget it. You should remember it. In other words, when you encounter profound teachings, you might think they're too lofty to reach, and then just give up and don't want to keep reading. For teachings that are simple, clear, and easy to understand, you might think, I've seen this before, I've heard this before, listened to 37 practices of a bodhisattva, memorized bodhicitta. There's nothing new here. It's unnecessary and redundant for me to study it again. But it shouldn't be like this. Some content may seem simple, and the wording may be straightforward, but for us, this content is still something that we will need throughout our entire lives, and even life after life. You must keep practicing continuously. Otherwise, you don't seek out the higher teachings and you look down on the simpler ones. You will never truly receive the Dharma. When His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok taught the Manjushri Great Perfection, he also quoted a Tibetan saying, one that is well known. Akka finds that the great teachings are too difficult for him to put into practice, so he is unable to follow them. At the same time, when it comes to the small teachings, Akka simply does not feel motivated or willing to practice them either. When death comes, Akka dies without ever having practiced at all. Here, Akka is simply an abbreviation for monastics. This means that some practitioners are unwilling to practice the higher teachings and also unwilling to practice the simpler ones. In this way, their whole life passes by in a daze. When they leave this world, they haven't practiced any Dharma at all. Many people really do end up like this, so you must be careful. Therefore, whether it's a profound teaching or a simple one, remember, you should treat each and every one of them as if they were nectar. Whenever a teaching is being explained by any Dharma teacher, I keep going over this again and again, and you should also reflect on it once more. For example, if even a master like Patrul Rinpoche needed to hear the preliminary teachings more than 20 times, then how many times would it actually take for people like us to truly understand? It should probably take 50 or 60 times before we can fully grasp their meaning. Otherwise, if we compare our own capacity to that of Patrul Rinpoche, we should be well aware of where we stand. So if you ever really feel weary or bored with the Dharma, you must pay close attention to that. We have a certain problem now. If we haven't received a teaching before, we want to go and listen to it. I've read this before. I've definitely heard this teaching before. So I don't need to listen again. Many people have this problem for various reasons, but it's not reasonable. Some great masters in the past made vows in their lifetimes. I will read the Bodhicitta 100 times. I'll read practices 100 times. They make these vows themselves while making the vow. Whenever any virtuous teacher gives a teaching, they're also willing to go and listen. If we have this kind of attitude, these teachings will be beneficial to our mental continuum. Otherwise, our practice will also encounter certain difficulties. In short, we must absolutely follow the correct and precise contextual relationships. In summary, the above sequence is absolutely extremely important for the overall process. We need to systematically and thoroughly grasp the full meaning of every single term. Okay, let's stop here.
Sodargye Bandangara Padma Sodargye Bandangara Padma Sodargye